My program is called Comrade, I Remember. Talking about events and people of 75 years ago may seem out of time, out of place, considering all that is happening today. But I'm 95 years old, and there are people I want you to know, things I want to say. Of the 16 million Americans who served in World War II, 1 million were in actual combat. Of those, less than 15,000 are still living. In Colorado, there must be less than 300. I guess that's why I'm here talking to you. But I've got my own motive. In the book, How Green Was My Valley, Richard Llewellyn puts it into words. On the last page, he says, "But you have gone now, all of you, that were so beautiful when you were quick with life, yet not gone, for you are still a living truth inside my mind. So how are you dead, my brothers and sisters, and all of you, when you live with me as surely as I live myself?" I believe with Llewellyn that we live on in others, that my comrades live on in me. But that's not all, for we have music and art and the written word. We have Shakespeare. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. I didn't start out to be in the infantry. I was a junior in high school when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and Germany declared war on us. Our lives changed quickly. Even in Indiana, we put dark curtains over the windows because we didn't know how far the German bombers could reach. Our older brothers and cousins were subject to immediate call-up, and we knew we would go into the service on graduation. Our athletic fields became obstacle courses with climbing walls and ropes. We soon got word of casualties among those who had already graduated and entered the service. The first was a star football player who was shot down over the Pacific. Some of us enlisted in Army or Navy programs, which sent you to a college to become an officer. I went to the University of Kentucky to become an engineer officer. This lasted 2 quarters, at which time the Army needed infantrymen more than engineer officers. After 9 months or so of training, I went with my division, the 100th, to France. We had our first fatality on my 19th birthday, November 9th, 1944. My roommate at Kentucky, Denzel Dupler, died in Luxembourg in January 1945. My mother learned of it from his mother. I know that our children going forth into life will remember that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and that there was a landing at Normandy, and that we won the war. But will they remember that Robert Burleson died firing his Browning automatic rifle at tanks as they overran the company? Or that Chester Merrill and Garo Yazuzhin died crossing the river at Heilbronn? Or that Lieutenant Petracco, who was loved by his men, died taking the town? Or that Richard Polimas died singing Darling Je vous aime beaucoup? Or that Jimmy Rembert died in our last action of the war? That's why I'm here. Remember me when the candle lights are gleaming. Remember me at the close of the long, long day. And it would be so sweet when all alone I'm dreaming, just to know you still remember me. That's Willie Nelson. November 9th, 1944, my 19th birthday. We stand in the rain in the woods in the Vosges Mountains in Lorraine and sing several hymns before going into combat. Among them, I Would Be True, and I Need Thee Every Hour. Before we can disperse, shells begin exploding in the trees above us. Johnny Chilemi is our first fatality. After dark, I'm sent to the company command post on some errand. I poke a twig in my eye and make my way almost blindly. I would be true, for there are those who trust me. I would be pure, for there are those who care. I would be strong, for there's much to suffer. I would be brave, for there's much to dare. I would be brave, for there is much to dare. That's the way I remember it. In the rain, in the woods, in Lorraine, on my 19th birthday. A night in November, snow and mud. We marched 13 miles to capture a town. Several German soldiers fall in with our column, thinking we're retreating Germans. We capture them when we hear them speak. The infantry scout. In bare December woods we lie, on frozen ground to wait and try to look through distant trees to see if we will live or we will die. No hero's choice has put me here, caught between two kinds of fear, one of safety bought with scorn, and one of duty bought most dear. At a hushed command I rise, to those behind I am their eyes, or more, their blind man's cane that probes until it meets with some surprise. And now, I fearful move ahead toward the forest's hidden dread. True to them and true to me, there's a little more that can be said. Christmas Eve, 1944. The open rolling hills near Rimling, France, are covered with snow. Burley and I huddle in a hole. A flare brings momentary daylight, and then it's night again. In the distance, but too close, the sound of German tanks on the move. On the same night, in the English Channel, a troop ship is torpedoed. 763 Americans are lost, including my high school classmate, Robert McIntyre. He's listed in the tables of the missing in the Normandy American Cemetery at Calville-sur-Mer, France. Bob was a star basketball player and someone whom I remember as a joy to be around. But his plans were interrupted. It's mid-January 1945. Robert Burleson, Burley, dies of wounds received when the company is overrun. Bold, cautious, true. And my loving comrade. That's Walt Whitman. Epinal. It seems unfair, considering all, that I am here in this place now with 90 summers on my brow, and you are there in Epinal, among our comrades sleeping there, that I can hear the robins sing and see the almond tree in spring, and you are there. It isn't fair. Flowers, if you grow in Epinal, grow near where Robert lies. I will dream that he has eyes and see some fairness after all. Robert was my foxhole buddy. When I became sick, he took me to the medics who sent me to the field hospital. When I was discharged, I learned that the company had been overrun and that Robert had been wounded. On my way back to the company, I learned that he had died. A few weeks ago, I discovered that we'd been in the same hospital and that he died 4 days after I left. Had I known, I could have gone to him. There's a line from Walt Whitman that I can't separate from Robert. It's in the poem, "As Toilsome I Wandered Virginia's Woods." As toilsome I wandered Virginia's woods to the music of rustling leaves kicked by my feet, for 'twas autumn. I marked at the foot of a tree the grave of a soldier, mortally wounded he, and buried on the retreat. Easily all could I understand. The halt of a midday hour, when up, no time to lose. Yet this sign left on a tablet scrawled and nailed on the tree by the grave. Bold, cautious, true, and my loving comrade. Long, long I muse, then on my way go wandering, many a changeful season to follow, and many a scene of life. Yet at times through changeful season and scene, abrupt, alone, or in a crowded street, comes before me the unknown soldier's grave, comes the inscription rude, in Virginia's woods, bold, cautious, true, and my loving comrade. Sometimes I've Googled my poems to see if they've been used. I found the poem Epinal in the book The Wind in the Grass by James McGuire. I found that Jim and his wife Barbara, thinking I had died, went in 2012 to the American Cemetery in Epinal in Lorraine. And Jim read the poem at Robert Burleson's grave. Then he tucked it in the ground next to the marker. How wonderful of them. Sometimes, just recently, my son contacted the Facebook website of the American Cemetery at Epinal. He sent the poem Epinal. The website responded with a photo of two little French children reciting the poem at Robert's grave. They had also brought flowers. There are people who have adopted individual graves in the Epinal Cemetery. They're called Les Parrains, or the Godfathers. The godfather for Robert is Ben Housen. On September 23rd, there were two ceremonies celebrating the liberation of Epinal in World War II. One was at the American Cemetery, and the other in the town center. At the one in the town center, Ben Housen's children read Epinal, and a friend read a French translation of it. A band played the French national anthem, the Marseillaise. Robert, the people of Lorraine, whom you helped save, won't let you be forgotten. In the book, All Quiet on the Western Front, the German soldier is at last killed on a day so quiet that the Army report for that day was all quiet on the Western Front. On such a day, Staff Sergeant Richard Polimas, Old Greenwich, Connecticut, a good soldier, was killed near Rennes, France. I can hear him as he sings, "Darling, je vous aime beaucoup, je ne sais pas what to do." He was sitting defiantly on the edge of his foxhole when a mortar shell found him. Heilbronn. I remember the river, the small boats on the far shore, and beyond the broken wall, the buildings torn by war and fallen comrades. I remember the catwalk and the factory, the voices down below, the grenade that fell among us as if warning us to go. I remember midnight and vivid in my mind retreat, the burning catwalk, safety, but a comrade left behind somewhere in the dark. And I remember morning and Roski coming back unharmed. While we were trapped on a second floor by the burning catwalk and Germans on the floor below us, fierce battles were going on a short distance away. The cemetery at Arlington has a record of one of them. In Arlington is a gravestone with 6 names on it, including Lieutenant Peter Petracco. These 6 died together and are buried together with a common headstone, comrades still. Something happened the day after we crossed the river that I've described in a poem called The Meeting. Once, in a contested place, I met a soldier face to face. We stopped and turned and walked away, both to live another day. I often wonder who he was, and where he is, and whom he loves, and if he ever sees like me a soldier in his memory, or if before the end he fell, leaving only me to tell of our meeting face to face once in a contested place. One of my comrades was my father-in-law, Owen Dyer. He had been in France in World War I. We didn't talk much about our wars. I was too fresh from mine and wasn't talking much. I think because of that, he didn't talk much about his. I regret that. I would have talked to him about all quiet on the Western Front and about the German soldier who served through the whole war only to die at the very end. And I would have told him about Jimmy Rembert, who died at the very end of ours. I would have played Roses of Picardy and asked him if he had been in Picardy and known Colonette with the sea blue eyes. And Owen Dyer and I would have had a glass of wine. Some of you may have seen The Monuments Men with George Clooney, or read the book by Robert Edsel, which tell of the repositories in which the Nazis had hidden art treasures. From these, we learned many years later that when we crossed the river at Heilbronn, we had unknowingly landed on one of them, a salt mine. My comrades who died there accomplished more than they knew. The salt mine, in the voice of Chester Merrill, Lorraine American Cemetery, France. We had crossed the river in those small boats, and as we ran toward the wall, I was hit, and the medics, without hope, carried me to the command post and laid me among our dying comrades. They say where we crossed the river, there's a salt mine, and that they found their hidden treasure, thousands of paintings and other things unimaginable. There was a Rembrandt among the paintings, and the ancient stained glass windows, 12th to 14th centuries, from the cathedral at Strasbourg. The Nazi officers had orders to destroy it all, the so-called Nero decree. But in the confusion of our attack, the miners prevented the mine from being destroyed, and an American officer who knew of the treasures appeared at the mine in time to keep it from flooding, and everything was saved. I wish that as I lay there with my comrades, we had known of the Rembrandt and those windows. A painting by Leonardo da Vinci, Woman with an Ermine, was stolen by the Nazis from a museum in Krakow, Poland, and recovered by the monument men at the end of the war. Edsel has another book, Saving Da Vinci, which takes its name from this painting. Edsel quotes from President Roosevelt's dedication of the National Gallery of Art in March 1941. The purpose of the American people is that the freedom of the human spirit and human mind that has produced the world's great art and all its science shall not be utterly destroyed. In its essence, that's what Chester Merrill and the others died for. We lived in Australia for a while in the 60s. I don't know how many times while we were living there we were thanked for saving them in World War II. If you doubt that we should have entered that war, go to Australia and ask that generation. It was the Coral Sea, Midway, and Guadalcanal they were thinking of, for the fate of Australia and New Zealand hung in the balance. In our little town has had at least 3 veterans of Guadalcanal: Alan Albert, John Hawkins, and Tom Balch. Alan and Tom were Marines, and John was on a destroyer that covered the landing. I think of them when I read Michener's Tales of the South Pacific. Michener said, "They will live a long time, these men of the South Pacific. They had an American quality. They, like their victories, will be remembered as long as our generation lives. After that, like men of the Confederacy, they will become strangers. Longer and longer shadows will obscure them until their Guadalcanal sounds distant on the ear, like Shiloh or Valley Forge." It's as if through Alan or John or Tom, we have known someone who was at Shiloh or Valley Forge. We have known someone who was part of a small band that turned the tide of the war at Guadalcanal. The Command, a short story in 2 voices. Voice 1. It was the last major battle of the war, but of course we didn't know that. It had lasted 9 days so far, largely because they couldn't get tanks across the river. At the edge of town, away from the river, were 2 large hills from which our artillery observers could direct fire, and as long as we held these, it wasn't over. I was in command of a small group of 12 officers and enlisted men, SS, Volkssturm, even Hitler Youth, who came together through the chaos of the 9 days and now found themselves in a hidden underground bunker at the base of one of the hills, waiting and watching, the only barrier to the hill. We'd been in this place for a night and into the next day, when about midday, an American patrol appeared, working its way up the hill. First the scout, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I could tell the squad leader was number 2. Now they were all in our rifle sights, easy prey. I held up my hand and quietly gave the command, "Hold your fire." We let them pass, and that's how our war ended. As they passed out of sight, someone began to sing, and then all of us. We sang all the old songs we had sung in victory and defeat, and could not command the tears. We knew the hilltop to be unoccupied. We waited. In about an hour, they appeared again, coming back. Now they could hear the singing, and they crawled toward the bunker. The squad leader called, "Kommen Sie aus, Händen hoch," which we did. We had heard that many captives had been shot, and we could only hope, and we were lucky. The American squad leader was a boy of no more than 19. We had left our weapons in the bunker, were relieved of things like binoculars, and were taken to their command post. Home became a possibility. Voice 2. It had been about 9 days since we crossed the river. In spite of all the casualties, my squad, already down to 8, hadn't lost anyone. Despite leading the crossing, being trapped, and having a grenade fall on our midst, we were unscathed. The company had now fought through the town and was at the foot of a hill from which the Germans had been directing artillery fire. We'd been there overnight, and in the morning the platoon commander told me they didn't know whether the hill was still occupied, and my squad was to find out. At that time, the squad, as best I can recall, consisted of Duke Rebello, 1st Scout, Calvin Campbell, Emmett Jordan, Frank Roski, Joe Stern, Harry Smith, Telesforo Albenga, and me. So we started out. At the base of the hill was an alley which we had to cross. Fearing it might be raked by fire as we crossed it, we crossed very quickly, all except Joe Stern, that is. Joe hadn't quite grasped the idea, and he stopped in the alley to look both ways. But there was no fire, and we proceeded on, spread out in a line toward the hill. I don't remember anything about the ascent, but at the top we found no one, and we started back by the same route. We had nearly reached the alley when we heard singing coming from a bunker or cellar. We crawled toward it, and when we reached it, I called Comrade aus, Hand and Hoke, come out, hands high, and they did. There were a dozen or so of them, officers and enlisted men. They had decided their war was over. We took them to company headquarters. I have a pair of binoculars I took from their commander. It was clear that had they chosen, they could have easily killed us all as we passed them on our way up the hill. There are 3 to whom I know I owed my life during the war. 2 were German, one of them this officer who must have said, "Hold your fire." I believe our last action of the war must have been on April 14th, 1945, for that was the day Jimmy Rembert was killed. The war in Europe ended about 3 weeks later. On that day, we were advancing through farm country and meeting some resistance. I remember a field we had to cross and that there was some rifle fire. I remember running and making it across the field. There was to a barn. There was an oat bin in the barn, and I fell on the oats in a fetal position and shook. Then, after a few minutes, we regrouped and moved on. But that was pretty much the end of the war, although we didn't know it. When we were on the march, but not under fire, we would sometimes sing. We sang Tipperary, Pack Up Your Troubles, songs from World War I. We sang Waltzing Matilda from Australia. And we sang Lily Marlene, a German song, which still takes me back when I hear it. Wie einst Lily Marlene, as then Lily Marlene. When we are marching in the mud and cold, and when my pack seems more than I can hold, my love for you renews my might. I'm warm again. My pack is light. It's you, Lily Marlene. It's you, Lily Marlene, my lily of the lamplight, my own Lily Marlene. VE Day 1995, Cedaredge. The war in Europe ended 50 years ago. A letter home dated May 8, 1945 says, "We were on the march when we got the news." Strangely, I can't remember the exact moment, but I do know my reaction. First, that I had survived and what that meant to my family. Second, that it came too late for many comrades and their families. And third, that we probably have only a short breathing space before going to the Pacific. How improbable to have survived and to be here in this place. It's as if I've lived two totally different lives. I wonder how many veterans feel the same. Sometimes I go to a school to tell them what I've learned in 90-some years. When I talk to them about the war, I tell them of the ones we left behind, to be gold stars and grieving window panes. How if you live, they're what you think about, and glory isn't even in your mind. And what of those caught in your rifle sight? Those too you think about, for they as you trudged in the mud, lay fearful in the night, and dreamed of home. Those two you think about. Those two. I tell them that. I know it to be true. Of our original 40-man platoon, there were 4 left at the end of the war. And of my 12-man squad, I was the only one. There's a book published in 1864, The Last Men of the Revolution. At the end of the book is a quote from Browning. "How will it be when no more saith I saw?" How will it be when no more saith I saw? In my poems, I've sometimes seen a German soldier as a brother. How can I do that, considering the terrible things Germany was doing? It was because I could imagine that soldier in my rifle sight was someone like me, caught up in the chain of events like me, someone who might have sung Lily Marlene. I believe that had I not seen him as a brother, at least retrospectively, I would have lost my humanity, and the war would have defeated me, even though we won. I want to remember not just my friends who died in our war, but also those we called enemies. For what was an enemy but a brother? It is one of the cruelties of war that we are forced to kill our brothers. Memorial Day 2015, for an unknown German soldier. Comrade, I remember all. I hear my shot. I see you fall. Too few the years 70, for wounds to mend, for wounds to mend. In the daytime, all seems right. But then comes night, and in the night, 70 fly by, and then you fall again. You fall again. I'm going to play a song written in 1809. It's called Ich hatte einen Kameraden, or I Had a Comrade. I'll play it for Robert Burleson. I've written some words for it. Once I had a comrade. He meant the world to me. He saved my life, and then he died. He died instead of me. What greater friend could be? What greater friend could be? And for all of them, friend or foe, il silenzio.